Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Maqbool with you at PTV WORLD. In today's show, we will be talking about two important stories. The first is with reference to what has happened in Afghanistan and taking a look back at the 20-year-old war, and then of course the chaotic and hasty withdrawal of the US troops as well, and looking back over the past year since the Taliban regime has taken control in Afghanistan, what has happened, what sort of suffering continues to exist even today, and whether or not in the aftermath of such a long war we've seen any lessons being learned, particularly from the US administration and of course the US troops as well, whether or not there has been any sort of acknowledgement of what needed to have been done, what should be done in the future with respect to certain measures being taken with regards to other countries, whether or not there has been any sort of analysis or review of the past by the US administration. So we're going to take a look at the past year completely as well, what has happened in Afghanistan, what still continues to factor in terms of the suffering of the people, and then of course regarding the US, what sort of measures did the US administration did or did not take, and who is to really blame, and if we talk about the kind of action still being taken by the US, whether or not there is any sense of accountability. So that is what is going to be our segment of the show today. That is going to be the first part of the show. Our last part is going to take a look at the Chief of Army Staff's visit where he went to the UK, and he also attended the passing out parade at the Royal Military Academy where he was the chief guest, and he also addressed the parade and talked about how of course he's proud of all the cadets graduating. Also among them were two Pakistani cadets who were graduating, and he said he's equally proud of them as well, and talked about how there needs to be a lot of responsibility coming in from the cadet side, particularly in terms of decision making and taking full responsibility of the decisions as well. He also emphasized on the deep-rooted ties between Pakistan and the UK, and also highlighted how his presence there meant that this is something that is important to not just Pakistan but the UK as well, and that this relationship has a lot more potential. So we're going to be talking about that at the end of the show. For this and more, as always, I've been joined in the studios by Farrukh Pitafi and Raja Faisal, and we've been joined by our guests online as well. We've been joined by Mr. Asif Durrani, who's a former ambassador, and we've been joined by Mr. Jahangir Khattak, senior analyst. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us in the debate. We're also going to be joined later on the telephone line by Mushtaq Yousafzai, who's a senior journalist. Let me start with you, Mr. Asif. When we talk about what has been happening in terms of the U.S. administration's withdrawal, of course, the U.S. troop withdrawal in Afghanistan and the end of such a long war, whenever we look at such events in history, and especially conflict-ridden events, is there any review or analysis actually even done by the forces who have caused certain damages, who have been involved in a conflict that of course incurred damages not just to them as well but to the other party as well? And then of course looking back, when we think about all of these issues, is it a common precedent for countries to review their actions and measures and try and understand what sort of lesson they need to learn from this? Mr. Asif, can you hear me?
There seems to be audio problem.
Yeah.
Mr. Asif, unfortunately, we cannot hear you. Can you please try and unmute yourself?
Can you
Yes.
hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, the countries, when they are involved in crises, they do, review their policies, and then there's always a mid-course correction. United States has done that precisely, and then President Trump, if you recall, he, in fact, when he asked his generals whether they can win the war, so the answer was no. When the answer was no, it means then he said, why are we wasting our men and material? And almost on average, they were spending $50 billion per annum in Afghanistan. So he considered it as a wasteful expenditure. And then the second aspect, which is very important, was that there was a bipartisan support in the United States. It was a way ending the United States troops mission in Afghanistan, which that is why when Trump lost elections and Biden took over, he did not change a comma or full stop in the agreement, and he went by that, and that's how he, in fact, stuck to the agreement. and the timeline which were agreed to by the Trump administration were fully implemented by the United States. Some circles call it that it was a precipitous withdrawal or a withdrawal in haste. I don't think so. It was the case. They had already decided about that, and then there was also issues which were coming up, and then President Trump himself, while giving the withdrawal date, announced that their competition is now with China. So I think so their priorities had changed, which is why that they withdrew from Afghanistan. Yes.
Right. Let me also welcome in the debate Mr. Mushtaq Yousafzai, who's a senior journalist. He's joined us on telephone line. Welcome to the debate, sir. Let me now go to Mr. Jahangir and talk about this particular aspect of the Biden administration and the Trump administration as well. When we look back at the withdrawal and the evacuation and the kind of impact that has had on Afghanistan even till now, can we really see the distinction between who is to be held accountable in terms of the Biden administration or the Trump administration? When we look back, I understand that a lot of what was agreed upon or talked about regarding withdrawal of troops had been decided till then, but isn't there also accountability on the Biden administration to have revised that or taken a look at what needed to be done or how it needed to be carried out?
Thank you so much, Sana, and my salam to your honorable guests and colleagues as well. I feel that you cannot just blame Trump and Biden for what happened in Afghanistan. I think all the successive administrations that ruled, I think rather administered the Afghan war, they shared the blame somewhere. And when the war was over, if you look at it, in an election year, when Democrats and Republicans are virtually dagger drawn and they are going after each other, Afghanistan is one subject where, yes, there is criticism of Biden for the hasty, chaotic withdrawal, but not more than that. Why? Because, interestingly enough, during the elections, the 2020 elections, there was barely any difference between the promises, election promises that Trump and Biden were making with the American nation. Both were promising that they will withdraw the troops from Afghanistan and end this unending war. So that was one reason. And also, I feel that there was the sudden collapse of the Afghan government. I don't think Americans were even ready for that. In the month of July, which is a month prior to American withdrawal, Trump himself had asked the former president Ashraf Ghani that he should speak to Taliban and come up with some political solution, which at that time Ghani had rejected. And all of a sudden, this sudden withdrawal created a crisis. America was not ready. The world was not ready. I don't think even Afghans were ready for that. And people who were in slippers, and they just took over the Afghan presidential palace. So the world was not ready. And so this is another reason for chaotic withdrawal. As far as the accountability process is concerned, and certainly I can speak more about the reasons, but I'll just go to the accountability because where I am sitting, there is still conversation going on, even though I don't see the level of pitch that you will expect, since it was a huge investment in blood and treasure that America spent, and also political capital that America spent on Afghanistan. And the dividends that it got at the end are very, very or barely visible. So I think that conversation is still going on. Even in American newspapers, you do see articles coming here and there and telling the stories, raising questions. And internally, at the government level, the Biden administration, President Biden himself had announced that, he will be very happy to have a congressional hearing on it as well. What happened? Why America lost in Afghanistan? The congressional committee has been made, but it has not been finalized because the Republicans have not nominated their few of their members. So that hearing has not happened.
Very
Internally,
true.
different.
Very true, sir. I'll go towards Mushtaq Yusufzai Saab. Obviously,
Let me just confirm if he's with us.
Yeah,
Mushtaq Saab, are you with us? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
yes,
Great.
he can.
Yes, Faiz.
Earlier, Jahangir Khattak Saab, he was talking about the hasty withdrawal of US. There was another hasty withdrawal back in days right after the Cold War, when we saw that the Americans, they simply got out of Afghanistan and left the mess for people of Afghanistan as well as Pakistan as well. And why I'm saying this, because there was another Democrat once in her speech, she mentioned it that we left Pakistan with the stingers and with all of the mess to settle in Afghanistan, and of course it was an undone business at that time, and that's why we saw that that mess later on became a problem for the whole region. Once again, we have another Democrat, obviously Biden administration. They got out of the region once again in haste, and they are not looking back. Do you think that this Democrat needs to listen to the previous Democrat when it comes to this region? Of course, this wasn't the time to leave Afghanistan in a mess, in a political mess, and obviously in the humanitarian crisis it is going through, sir?
I think the Trump administration was quite careful, and that's why they started negotiation with the Taliban phase-wise. And they spent a lot of time, but they wanted to have careful withdrawal from Afghanistan. They didn't want Afghanistan to become you can say, a stronghold of the militant from all over the world. So that's why they wanted to have a very peaceful settlement with the Afghan Taliban, and that's why they wanted to resolve issues, especially Al-Qaeda and other foreign militants. But they didn't care about other regions, other countries. They were only concerned about America and its allies. But then the Biden administration, they also wanted to have some negotiations, but at the end, they tried to convince Ashraf Ghani through Zalmay Khalilzad, Ashraf Ghani and Abdullah and some other stakeholders that the Americans are going to leave. You have to settle your issues with the Afghan Taliban. But I think they were not expecting it so quickly, and they didn't believe that the American will leave Afghanistan so suddenly because they have a huge investment there. But I remember I was sitting with some people from Afghanistan in July last year, and they received a phone call from some of their people that the Taliban started capturing districts. And I remember Space Reading looked like he was not happy with their decision, and he asked his men that who asked them to start capturing districts. We haven't reached any agreement so far that American will leave Afghanistan within a certain time of period. But then he was told that Mullah Yaqub, now he is the Afghan defense minister, and he was told that it is his decision and he is directed by the Shura. And then I saw within a few days they captured several provinces. But even if I tell you, even the Taliban didn't expect that American will leave Afghanistan so quickly.
Right.
And that's the reason that they were not prepared how to go on.
Right, absolutely, Mushtaq Saab, and we'll talk more about that. But Farrukh, I want to again come back to the US and understanding whether or not there is any sort of even a will to look back and to understand what has happened in Afghanistan, what really are the lessons that the US need to be learning, and whether or not they are serious in actually implementing those in the future as well.
Right, Sana, that is a very good question, but allow me to actually come back to what Raja Faisal was earlier saying, and that is probably why this is going to be my only intervention throughout this topic. But every time Raja Saab speaks, I feel duty bound to actually correct the record. US back in 80s was never actually in the US, in Afghanistan. It never was stationed, it never was running the government. It might have other pipelines and through that it was operating, but it never was part of the picture. So this time the situation was different. And that's why cigar report that has come, it is the final cigar report, right? The Special Inspector General on Afghanistan reconstruction, that is a very important institution, and they have been very conscientious. I think at this moment the biggest stock taking needs to be not about the withdrawal, but why is it that an operation that took place in the name of fighting terrorism all of a sudden became a nation building enterprise, because then you saw the continuous shifting of goals, and that became a very terrible thing in the end. Why? Because this lull before the storm continued for 20 years, and that's why the population grew and new children came who became adults, and all of a sudden one fine morning they learned that their absolute enemies, or the people they thought were the enemies, took over the country, right? And I shudder while thinking about the trauma that must have caused because of this. But there are four dimensions to the whole story. The first one is withdrawal itself. As has been pointed out, it wasn't only a democratic call to make it a rushed withdrawal. If you remember, President Trump actually wanted to invite the Taliban to Camp David, no, nothing less, on the anniversary of 9/11, right? He had to cancel it. But that is one thing. I think America, because there was fatigue and because there was nation building failure, they had to withdraw no matter what. The second thing was the total and immediate collapse of the Afghan government that caused all the trauma that we have seen. I think in that context, Cigar's report is important because they are investigating where they went wrong. And I think one strange coincidence that actually stands out is regarding $5 million US that were in the custody of NDS, Afghanistan's intelligence agency, that first disappeared and then it ended up with Taliban. What kind of handshake was this? Was there something going on? Because Hamdullah Mohib, the NSA at that time, actually spoke to Ashraf Ghani, and it seems Ashraf Ghani believes that he was the man who convinced him to escape the country. Right? This is the second thing. Is there a possibility that a third party like India or somebody else might be involved in whatever was going on? The third one, the result, the crisis, humanitarian crisis, it keeps on going on and it is horrible. And sadly, because the fourth dimension comes in, that is terrorism, and Ayman al-Zawahiri was just killed. Because of that, that doesn't seem to end very soon. Unfortunately, that is the state of affairs. The US is taking stock, but are we, the neighbors of Afghanistan, or the Afghan themselves also taking stock? Because for the past 20 years, we have seen that Afghans actually keep on blaming other countries, not themselves.
Right. Mr. Asif, when we look at this situation and of course the various factors that are involved in what has been going on in Afghanistan and what has caused the suffering that we see today, do you think that it is fair to hold the US accountable in terms of its responsibility towards continuing to support the kind of suffering that still exists in Afghanistan, be it humanitarian or otherwise as well, and considering the kind of situation that we are seeing in terms of the capability or the will by the Taliban regime, has that blame shifted a little?
I think the US is very much responsible for what has happened in Afghanistan, at least during the past 2 decades. And their withdrawal was just not, a one-odd event, in fact. Soon after the withdrawal, the United States put restrictions on the Afghan accounts. Close to $9.6 billion have been frozen, of which $7.5 billion are held in the US and the remaining amount elsewhere in Europe. So, and this has in fact, and then they have put sanctions on the Afghan banks. So the result is they cannot enter into normal trade through normal international banking system. And this has paralyzed the whole country. So in a way, there's a level of or an element of vengeance on the part of the United States as far as Afghanistan is concerned. We may have differences with the Taliban, whatever it is, but right now we are seeing it that almost 30 countries are in direct contact with the Taliban. Almost 16 countries have reopened their missions. Of that, almost 6 countries are keeping their ambassadors there, especially the immediate neighbors of Afghanistan. So this is the situation where we find it. And and for Taliban, the lesson is that they may perhaps boast about the victory, but the question is that now again they are begging the Americans to unfreeze the accounts. So what kind of a victory is this? So this is something, it's a mixed package, and it is going to continue like this. But the main thing which should be, of course, for Pakistan and the immediate neighbors is that if the humanitarian crisis becomes more aggravated, so that would immediately impact the immediate neighbors of Afghanistan, especially Pakistan, because there's a symbiotic relationship between Afghans and Pakistanis. And you will find that immediately, whatever, if they have to seek refuge, so their immediate destination is Pakistan.
Right. And Ambassador Saab, I understand your point, and of course the aspect of the frozen assets is a valid point as well. But Jahangir Saab, I want to understand, when we talk about realistically what is going on and how a year has passed, and there has been a lot of talk about how the Taliban regime hasn't fulfilled its own commitments, and of course has also contributed to the increase in suffering in the people of Afghanistan. When we take a look at all of the situation and the fact that we're nowhere near to international recognition of the Taliban regime as well, despite countries having continued to have dialogue with the Taliban regime or opened up their offices. But when we talk about all of these issues and the fact that where we see the US's attention moving away from Afghanistan, more towards Russia and China, then what is it that our pointing finger can really achieve? If we are going to hold the US accountable or say that the US is to blame, realistically or tangibly speaking, what sort of a benefit does that create for the people of Afghanistan or at the end of their suffering?
Jahangir Saab, especially related to one of the requirements which was made by US from, they expected from Taliban to do, and that was to never let their land to be used against any of its neighbors or any of the countries of the world in terms of, terrorism, for terrorism. So if US was, able enough to secure all of its allies, why it didn't make sure that one of its allies, which was Pakistan, should be safe as well?
Well, that's a very valid point. And I will pick a few points based on the question because it has many elements. Number one is that in terms of international help, especially by the United States, I feel that in the past 1 year, since the American withdrawal, so far as we are speaking today, the international community has spent more than $1 billion in Afghanistan, and more than $700 million has come from the United States. 2, I know that the US has frozen $7 billion in the New York Federal Reserve Bank, where I'm sitting. And now, under a court injunction, the Biden administration has halved that amount to $3.5 billion. So $3.5 billion will be given to the Afghan government, and we still don't know how. And $3.5 billion will be going as a compensation to the 9/11 victims. That's another point, and it is another subject. But the conversation between the Afghan government and the Taliban and the US government have been going on. And just 2 days ago, 71 international economists, including Nobel laureates, have written a letter to Joe Biden, President Biden, asking him to unfreeze the entire $7 billion. They are arguing that the US has no right to keep this money. Rather, Afghans own it, Afghans should have it, and without this money, the Afghan economy, which has virtually collapsed, will make the situation worse. Now, why the international community is investing this much money that they have already? Because the pressure is building. Political pressure here is also building on the Biden administration that they should make a swift decision on it. Because there are a few factors. An unstable Afghanistan, just like you rightly mentioned, that Pakistan is one of those very, very vulnerable countries with a porous border, which will be impacted adversely. Same is the case with Iran. Central Asian states, especially Tajikistan and Afghanistan's relations are really very bad right now. They have some relations with Uzbekistan, but Uzbekistan, even today, is holding more than 46 Afghan Army and Air Force helicopters and aircraft right now. They are not returning them to the Afghan government. And then same is the situation with Russia and China, which do want to maintain relations, but they are formally not recognizing. So the Taliban have their own issues, and the US government is dealing with its own issues at home, legally as well as politically. And in the process, what we are seeing in Afghanistan is a humanitarian disaster unfolding right in front of our eyes. 23 million Afghans are facing food insecurity. More than 3
Right,
million
absolutely.
children
Jahangir
are
Sahab, I
facing
just want
food
one quick
insufficient.
clarification. You talked about how the the US does not have any right to keep the frozen assets with them or freeze the assets of the Afghans.
This is what the
Yes, but
economists
I
are
just
saying.
want to
They wrote
understand the
them.
legality of it.
Noted, yeah.
And I want to understand, since of course the Taliban regime currently is not recognized, and of course there is talk of how the money can go in the wrong hands. Is there any sort of legal obligation, despite these facts, on the US to not be able to freeze these assets?
Well, the
Legally,
thing
to
is
hold
that
the US accountable. Is there any?
the thing is that the US itself has legal issues. Under the US law, the US cannot hand over it cannot in fact do any business with organizations that it considers terrorist organizations. More than 40 of current Afghan government are on the UN blacklist. 13 have been given exemption for foreign travel, including their foreign minister. So in such a situation, the US has its own legal system and they have their own politicians. There are people who are supporting that, no, the money should be given. And then people go to the court of law, and you know how the courts operate. So because of that, it's a very complicated process. And that's why political pressure is growing from everywhere on the Biden administration that they should make a decision. Look for a legal course that can lead to the release of these assets in a way. Like you can even create an international fund, which can be controlled by some Afghans in a way that the money does not go into the hands of Taliban. Because if it directly goes to the Taliban, it will be a violation of international law. That's what the US maintains.
And
So
sanctions
because of
also.
that, we have a very it's exactly because you are violating the sanctions regime. So it's a very complicated legal process, and
Right.
it will be resolved by political means, because
Right, but let us
solution
hope,
will
sir.
bring legal issues
Right,
to
Jagir
close.
Saab, let us hope that if Biden administration can overcome Khashoggi pressure and go to Saudi Arabia, then perhaps he can also take care of this matter. But allow me to actually,
That's why I said
Sana, with your
political.
permission. Yeah, Sana, with your permission,
Yes.
let me go to Mushtaq Yousafzai Saab. Mushtaq Saab, since we are talking about the state of affairs in Afghanistan right now, there seems to be a horizontal fight for power. There seem to be elimination that is going on. First, we saw Ayman Zawahiri being killed. Then we saw, Khalid Khorasani being killed. And finally, yesterday, Rahimullah Haqqani was also killed in a suicide attack. Is there a possibility that in coming days, the Taliban rank and file are going to struggle among themselves, and this only, a positive aspect of them, that they offer some kind of stability, is going to be compromised as well?
Well, the Taliban have a number of issues, and there is, you can say, no power struggle within the Taliban that is visible. But obviously, some of the groups, some of the commanders are very powerful, and they have a number of fighters, they have resources. So anyone who is holding important position, he's being accused by other people of bringing their own family members, relatives, friends to their department, to their ministry. So there's no merit right now, because they are still trying to run the government. We have 10 people, and they are trying to appeal to the Afghan who have left Afghanistan in there. sitting overseas to come and work with them. But obviously, it will take some time. But the Taliban have a number of issues, but the most important problem to them is the security situation in Afghanistan, and to them, a major headache is Islamic State because they have carried out a number of attacks in Nangarhar, Kunar, and they are trying to kill some of their important people. You can see they attacked this
Right. Let me,
prominent Taliban
Yusuf Zai
cleric in
Sahab,
Peshawar.
sorry to cut
And
you,
now,
but let me actually qualify my question by going a little bit more granular. Let me talk about recent assassinations as they were and who was blamed for it. When Ahmad Zawahiri was actually killed, the accusation was that one of the Haqqanis was actually sheltering him. And then the blame also came that TTP might have actually blown the whistle. And then a leader of TTP was also killed, and it was thought that perhaps he was assassinated by Haqqanis or their sympathizers. And finally, a Haqqani is also killed. So at this moment, and given that Haqqanis are thought to be the actual handlers of the TTP as it is in Afghanistan right now, do you think that there is a possibility of these very influential groups fighting among themselves and then eliminating each other and creating a lot of chaos?
Right now, if you ask me, the Taliban wanted to get rid of Al-Qaeda, the Pakistani Taliban, the Chinese and the Uzbek militants and Arab fighters, because they don't want to lose their government again. And that's why they are trying to facilitate peace talk between Pakistan and the Pakistani Taliban. They don't want these militant groups, Al-Qaeda, Pakistani Taliban, Chinese, to create problems for them. And you might have seen the Taliban reaction to the killing of Zawahiri. Initially, they have denied that nothing even had happened. Then they released a statement that yes, there was a rocket attack on a house in Kabul. And finally, in the evening, when people started sharing pictures of that house, then the Taliban confirmed that yes, there was a drone strike, but they didn't mention who was in fact killed in that drone strike. Then the Taliban said, we didn't know about Zawahiri living in Afghanistan. You know, that is not possible because some people reported that there are differences between Sirajuddin Haqqani, the acting interior minister, and Deputy Prime Minister Mullah Biradar. That's not true. Actually, they are part of the same government. They are members of the same shura. And it's not possible
but
that
Haqqanis don't trust Mullah Biradar.
Bring an important person like Imam Zawahiri. And Zawahiri had been living in Afghanistan, and he was the special guest. He was kept in Musa Qila in Helmand. And it was after 6 months the Taliban took over Afghanistan, he was brought to Kabul. And then he was given a house in a very safe place in Sherpur locality of Afghanistan. So that's not possible that Sirajuddin Haqqani himself will bring, a person like Zawahiri to Kabul. The Taliban are very careful because they don't want to create more issues for themselves. So
right.
Yeah.
Initially they wanted to keep quiet, and then they issue a statement very carefully. That, okay,
Yeah,
we didn't know about
Ambassador
Zawahiri
Durrani.
in Afghanistan.
Yeah, Ambassador Durrani, I just wanted to come towards you. Once again, let's talk about the withdrawal. And of course, we know when US was withdrawing from the region, Pakistan helped out and went out of its ways to make sure that a safe exit is given to US and its forces. And we know that Pakistan really helped US in them days. But do you think that diplomatically we failed, or we somehow did not take it to a level to get the appreciation from the world, and US itself could not give us appreciation being an ally who stood with US till the last day?
I fail to understand about the import of the question. What kind of appreciations we are talking about? It was a situation whereby the United States had to withdraw. And secondly, the safe passage. Yeah, Taliban were bound to give safe passage, otherwise they could have taken hell out of them. I mean, don't forget about the power which the United States wields. So here there is no question of appreciation. It was the job to be done, which was done. And all this had to happen under the directives of the UN Security Council resolutions. You are bound, even now when you are talk about Zawahiri, he has been killed under resolution 1267, 1368, and 1373, which are under Chapter 7. So all those people figuring in Al-Qaeda and Taliban list, if they are killed legally. So here we should have no mistakes. Yes, politically we can talk a lot. We can talk many things about the behavior of the Taliban, or their killing, or their coming to Kabul, if that was illegal or not. Because there was no...
We're almost at the end. Faisal, so just a quick remark from Jagir Sab, and then we'll conclude this session. Yes, Jagir Sab, anything you want to add?
Hello?
Yes, Ambassador. You're adding something?
Yeah. Please don't interrupt me when I'm just in the middle of it. Either don't ask me the question.
No, of course. We're just short of time. That's why we needed to move on. You can complete your thought.
Don't ask that question which about the appreciation. The question is, this country, we have in fact committed mistakes. And then we have to in fact repair that mistake. And the question is, the United States now is out of Afghanistan. It is almost out of the region. And there's the modus vivendi among the immediate neighbors of Afghanistan not to recognize Taliban until the time they ensure that their soil is not going to be used for terrorist purposes. So here it is important that United States, it should hold its part of the deal, which it is not, because it withdrew with the vengeance, and they want to hold Taliban for ransom. They want to hold the entire Afghan nation for ransom. That is another aspect of the fact of the life, which needs to be projected and which is not adequately projected. Yes.
Right. Asif Saab, have you completed your thought now?
Yes, he has.
Yeah.
All right,
Please
great. Let us go back to now Jagir Saab. Jagir Saab, we're about to conclude the segment since we're short on time. Anything you'd like to add before we do so?
I think I just want to comment on this appreciation side. First of all, I think that Pakistan probably did the right thing not to do that, because if you want to disengage the US-Pakistan relations from this Afghanistan nexus, you can never establish good, fruitful relations. If you are building your relations with US through Afghanistan, which has been unfortunately the policy, and that has not given us really good dividends, I think Pakistan itself should have projected more vigorously, forcing the US to acknowledge it. That's one. And two, Pakistan should develop its relations on a different track, independent of what's happening in Afghanistan. Yeah. Because every time Pakistan equates its relations with the US in terms of what's happening in Afghanistan, it creates trouble for itself. I think that has to change. And I'm glad that we did not do that. Yes, one thing that we should have done is to project the role that Pakistan played. We should have projected it more vigorously, more strongly. And also, we know the kind of relations that Pakistan and US have had over the past few years in terms of warmth and,
right.
Each one
Absolutely. Absolutely. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for. But thank you very much, Jahangir Khadak Saab, for joining us, Asif Durrani Saab and Mushtaq Yousafzai Saab for joining us and being a part of the debate. We move on now to our next segment, and we're going to be talking about the Chief of Army Staff's visit to the UK, in which he attended the passing out parade at the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst, where he was the chief guest. He also addressed the passing out cadets, and he was talking about, of course, various aspects of what they need to be indulging in, what they need to be focused on, and he was also saying that he's very proud of the 2 Pakistani cadets as well who were also graduating. And he also mentioned, of course, that Pakistan-US, UK ties have been of utmost importance to the country and will continue to do so, and his presence there is evidence of this fact. Faisal, when we look at this situation, of course, and this fact that the Army Chief has been quite a regular visitor at these military parades as well in the UK, and it is a sign of respect that was given to him as being the chief guest over here. And then, of course, the highlight that he made in his address as well of the 2 countries enjoying deep-rooted ties, and for that to be enhanced in the future as well. How do you look at this particular visit and the Chief of Army Staff's presence at the military parade as something that is a signal or a symbol of the way that the UK and Pakistan ties will develop in the future?
Sana, first of all, let me highlight here that this was the very first time that one of the, any of civilian or military leaders of Pakistan attended it as as a chief guest of this parade, and obviously it's a huge honor for Pakistan because this institution is a very old institution, and one of the best institutions, military institutions in the world. It is considered, and it is very important. And once again, it is a sort of a recommendation, I must say, that from the UK and from the Western powers, that Pakistan has relentlessly fought against terrorism, and time and again we have been hearing from the Western powers that especially the Britain that Pakistan fought against the terrorism, and for 15 consecutive years Pakistan fought against terrorism and Pakistan tried to control terrorism, and this is a sort of appreciation from the Western powers as well of Pakistan. And I must say that this event will be obviously very important, not only for Pakistan's effort against war on terror, but Pakistan Army as an institution as well, that its leadership is being accepted there as a chief guest, and I think it was a remarkable day.
Right. Farrukh, when we look at this particular visit, of course, and the way that the military leadership has obviously met, and they have, of course, previously in the past as well been part of different military parades and exercises and drills as well. Considering, of course, the situation at home as well, where there's been a lot of talk about political institutions, specifically the army as well, do you think that this particular visit actually puts in or re-strengthens the aspect of the public institution as being a strong entity within Pakistan and internationally as well?
Right. Not to be pernickety or anything, I just wanted to point out when Raja Saab was actually talking about his visit and his being chief guest, he was not accepted as a chief guest. He was invited as a chief guest, right? That is very important. Sandhurst, by the way, in the Army Chief's own speech also, he mentioned that it has a legacy of 200 years of producing great soldiers. So it is a unique honor for any Pakistani, because Raja Saab is right. Before our current Army Chief, none of Pakistanis was actually invited as the chief guest. Yeah. So it is a great honor. Now, there are 2 or 3 important aspects. One, Pakistan-UK relationship. I think that Pakistan got its independence from UK, and we have, our armies have been working very closely since day one, right? Pakistan's first commander-in-chief was a British national, right? So the story actually continues, and that tie is also important. Then the second aspect is what Raja Saab said. For some reason, whenever he talks about war on terror, he talks about 14 or 16 years. The war on terror has been going on for 20 years, and Pakistan, over 20 years, and Pakistan has been contributing a lot from day one. Perhaps the only country that has fought this much war on its own turf, its own land, and sacrificed over 80,000 people. So Pakistan's recognition of Pakistan's sacrifices, if it was not being done in the past, it was stupid, and if it is being recognized today, it is the right thing to do. The third thing, which is very important, is the question that you asked about the importance of institutions. I think Pakistan where we had a checkered history of democracy, one institution that actually really helped the country is military in its diplomacy. So army chiefs being there, and this event, and then he's going to interact with leadership of UK as well. This also strengthens the military diplomacy aspect as well. By the way, if you get time, do read the entire transcript of the Army Chief's speech, because it was a forward-looking speech. He also talked about automation that I keep on talking about, or for that matter, fourth industrial revolution, again AI and all that. So how things are going to move forward, I think it was an inspiring and very intelligent speech.
Yes, and my favorite part of the speech, I just wanted to highlight here, and I obviously took a screenshot of it as well. It was...
Show it.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just kidding. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. The Chief of the Army Staff, while addressing to the cadets, he said that the primary reason for armed forces to exist today should not be prosecute wars, but to ensure that they do not take place at all. You know, this is amazing, that seeking peace should be the motive.
Just to add to this point, remember every country, their defense minister is called defense minister, not offense minister. Their policy is called defense policy, not offense policy. So that is very important to understand, that all states actually act to ensure that war never breaks out. Unfortunately, it does, and it is. People are fighting in Ukraine, but let us hope in coming days we see such kind of wisdom or sagacity to prevail.
Absolutely, and that of course is the hope, and we really hope to see that sooner rather than later. That's all that we have from the debate at the moment. We'll see you on Monday now. Have a nice weekend.